All right, I think we're recording, and this week we are going to make a kind of fun fold card with a belly band. I don't know what to call it other than a fun fold card with a belly band. And it is featuring a lot of the items that are in the Dragonfly Garden suite. And it is, I think, a very quick but fun card. Obviously with a belly band that comes right off. And then the card itself is a little bit of a fun fold, just a little shutter in the front, and then a nice backdrop. And this features one of the stamps from the Dragonfly Garden set. And I am in love with this stamp. I'll be honest, when I first saw this set in the catalog, it did not capture my interest. But I am really glad that Elaine, that you suggested, or at least you prompted me to take a second look at the set with the Memories and More cards and just everything that's involved with it, because there are a lot of very, very fun pieces, including these super cute little ladybug trinkets, which are darling, and they come in quite a few. They're a nice little brass color, very fun. We'll use one of those. And then the paper that comes in this particular suite is beyond amazing. It's gorgeous. It has absolutely brilliant colors and wonderful, wonderful patterns. They're just stunning. And a lot of really nice, deep, rich colors and very bright colors as well that really go well with the overall theme of the suite. So these are two examples. They are the exact same card, and I'm just going to run through and we're going to make one of these. The card itself is very straightforward. I wanted to touch more on a couple of tips and tricks when you're making the belly band, and also with things just to think about when you're putting this card together so that it will work well for you and also for the person who gets it. So let's talk about the construction. We're going to start with a piece of cardstock, and I am using Mossy Meadow. So this is the base of my card. It's the same color that I used on this card. And the base measures, it's 8.5 long, 5.5 high. And it is scored right in the middle of the 8.5 side at 4.25. It's kind of hard to see that score line, but trust me, there is one. So there's one in the middle. And then the second score line is actually at the halfway point for half of the card. So since I scored it 4.25, half of 4.25 is 2 1/8. And that's where the second score is. And I'm going to go ahead and burnish these just because I want to get my card base all set up. So I'm going to first score, just like I'm making a regular A2 card, where the card would open like a book. And then that second score is going to go in the opposite direction. And that's what gives it a little bit of a fun fold in the front. And it's going to open like this. Now, as I go through, I will mention that there are many different ways to use this as the base for a card. The one that we're going to do requires a belly band to keep it together. Another way that you can make this card so that you can think about how you might want to make an alternative is you could put a large piece on the front, and that would be the front of your card, and then it would still open to the inside. If you do that, you don't really need a belly band because you will have a front that will hold everything pretty secure. But we're going to make this design. So what I did for this card is I wanted to have some interest, and I wanted to keep really using the same sort of theme and colors. And designer series paper, as we all know, is a really great way to do that. It is easy to use. It is great to have the colors coordinate. And also the patterns often bring a lot of interest into the design. So these two pieces, and I'm going to call these the folds just because I don't have a better name. So I'm calling this a fold, this area, and I'm calling this area another fold. Each of those has a separate piece of designer series paper, and it comes from the collection that I was just showing you. This is the 6x6 paper that comes in the collection. It's called Dandy Garden. And I just chose two pieces with patterns and colors that weren't super, super busy, but the colors complement the colors that I'm going to use when I get over to my image. So I kind of thought a little bit about how I want to put this together. And I like the whole vertical. The stripes are vertical, the foliage is kind of vertical, even though it's a little bit of a random pattern. But I wanted to keep that whole vertical theme going on this. Well, I'm going to change that because I decided to experiment with the card that I'm going to make right now using two other patterns. These are pieces that also come in that set of paper. The colors will work really well with what I'm going to do, but I just wanted to see how these are going to work. And what I need to have on those folds is each of these measures 2 inches by 5 3/8. And you know me well enough that I like to have a little bit of a frame around any kind of designer series paper or a focal point that highlights another color and gives you at least one more layer that you're looking at. So the designer series paper is specifically cut a little shorter in width and a little shorter in height than the card. So we're going to get 2 inches by 5 3/8. And this is where I wanted to just make sure that we can all think about how to cut the paper. And I know that's kind of a silly statement, but these pieces are 6x6. And if I need a piece that is going to be 2 inches wide and 5 3/8 inch long, then I've got a couple ways of actually cutting this. And I like to conserve paper. Well, 2 inches wide means with a 6x6, I can get 3 strips that would be 2 inches wide. But I'm going to have a piece at the bottom that I'm going to waste because I only need 5 3/8. So the way that I like to conserve paper on this is if I cut 2 inches and 2 inches, I'm going to have a full 2x6 left. So I'm going to actually cut this at 4 inches to begin with, because that's going to leave me a full 2x6 that I'll be able to use on something else. So I'm going to cut it at 4 inches, and I've got a piece left that is 6 inches by 2 inches. And then I'm going to cut it at 5 3/8. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to have this little strip that maybe I'll be able to use as an accent piece on something else. If I had done this differently, if I had first cut off 2 inches and then 2 inches and then cut off at 5 3/4, I would not have these as large a piece left as I do. So now I've got a piece that's 4 inches wide by 5 3/8 long, and I'm cutting this so I can actually make 2 cards. And I will be able to have 2 cards out of that cut. So these are the size that I need. They're 2 inches wide, and they're 5 3/8 long. That's awesome. Let's take it one step further. Let's think about pattern paper that has a pattern in a particular direction. I'm going to use this piece on the right in place of the one that I used on the sample card. And I want to make sure that these dandelions look like they're growing vertically. which means that when I end up cutting this, I want to cut it so I have a piece that would be in that shape. Okay, so if I do the same thing that I did just a minute ago, so I can get the bang for the buck and I get the largest pieces out of this particular piece of cardstock, I'm going to look at this vertically. I'm going to bring it over to my 4-inch line and I'm going to cut that. And I will have a 2x6 left of this piece of paper. Then if I take the piece that I just cut, this is now 4x6, and I want to trim that at 5 3/8. This is a very small piece of pattern, which by itself is really not going to work well. But on the other side, I've got a fun little strip that has part of a dragonfly that maybe I can use for an accent piece. And now I'm left with a piece that is 4 inches by 5 3/8. So I'm going to cut that at 2. The only reason I wanted to do this was to show you, at least in my crazy brain, how I think and how I work in terms of just cutting paper to try and get the most out of a piece. And some folks would think that is completely loopy because it's only paper, but I like to be a little conservative. So now I have 2 pieces of each color that I can use to make 2 cards. And I'm just going to put those to the side. I want to get all the pieces of paper that I need cut before I start assembling, because the assembly is actually pretty quick. All right, so we have our card base. We have the pieces cut for the designer series paper for the folds. So there are 2 pieces that are remaining, and they're on the actual focal point for the card. One is a piece of the bumblebee cardstock, and it may be a little difficult to see, but there's actually a frame that is around this piece of white cardstock. And the bumblebee is 4 1/8 wide. So again, it's a little bit shorter than 4 1/4. So 4 1/8 wide by 5 3/8 in height. And this bumblebee cardstock is one of my favorites. It is, I just think it's so bright and cheerful, and it goes so well with many colors. It's not really a yellow, it's kind of a mustardy color. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut a piece that is 5 3/8. So I'm putting it in on the 11-inch side. I'm going in at 5 3/8. I'm going to go ahead and cut that. And then I will cut 2 pieces. I just want to get 2 pieces all set so that eventually I can make 2 cards. And since I have everything out, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I've got this at 4 1/8. So there's 1 piece. And then I have another that I need to cut to 4 1/8. So I cut that right over. And I've got 1 more piece that is for another card. And it's always nice when you're cutting, if you have, you know, a sheet of cardstock or a sheet of designer series paper out, go ahead and cut it. And that way you're going to have a little bit of a supply so that you can make however many cards that you'd like. All right. So we have the pieces that we're going to use for our folds. I'm just going to lay these down, and the back of the card. There are a couple more pieces that we need to cut before we start stamping and assembling. And let's just look at what those are. We're going to have a piece, I used the basic white, and this is the one that I'm going to do stamping on. And I cut that to 4 inches wide by 5 1/4. And that allows the same size frame to be around my white piece, where I'll see a little bit of the bumblebee around all the edges. And I'll have the same size frame with the mossy meadow in the background. And I'll do the stamping in a minute, but you are going to need a piece of white cardstock or whatever color you choose. Again, it's 4 inches wide and 5¼ inches high. And then the other pieces of cardstock that you're going to need are going to be the ones that will be used to make the belly band. And what I decided to do for those is I went ahead and I just cut out a couple of pieces of cardstock, and they are the same color or colors as my background piece for the card base. So these pieces are both in Mossy Meadow. And the piece that I cut for my belly band is taken from a full piece of cardstock, and it measures 1 inch wide by 11 inches long. And then I cut a second piece that will go in the middle of the belly band, and it's just a little bit shorter or narrower. It's 3/4 inch wide and 11 inches long. And that's what we're going to use as the starting point for the belly band when we wrap that around. So again, these are both 11 inches long. One is 3/4 inches wide. The other is a full inch wide. And when you look at all these pieces, so if you look at these are the pieces that you will need to make the base for your card. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and we're going to start assembling. And I just wanted to show you a little bit of what I did that you may or may not want to do before you start putting some of these pieces on your card. And this relates in particular to the pieces of designer series paper that go on the folds. I don't know if this is really easy to see on camera. It may be. I ran these through an embossing folder, and I decided that I just wanted to put a little texture on these. And the embossing folder that I used is one that I've used an awful lot and I really, really like. It's the Tasteful Texture, and it puts such a nice subtle pattern on your pieces. And the other thing that I really like about this is you don't have to be really particular in how you line up your pieces. Sometimes there are embossing images that need to be pretty straight, and I might get a little more particular about how I line things up and try to get them as close to this line at the bottom of the embossing folder. On this one, I really don't care because it's a pretty random pattern. And I can also run both of these through my die cut machine at the same time because they both fit into the embossing folder without a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run these through. And I know this is not the most exciting thing to watch. So think of something else or sing a favorite song or whatever you'd like to do. And this is also a very old die cutting machine. I have not purchased one of the new ones. Eventually I may. I'm not really sure yet because this is still working well for me. This is a 3D embossing folder, so I do have the 3D embossing plate that is over the folder itself to give the right sandwich for me to be able to do the embossing. And you'll see when I take these out that there's just a nice subtle image that is on this designer series paper. It just gives it a little bit more, just a tad more of a design. And this is nothing you need to do. It's just a thought of something you may want to do. And again, it's a little bit hard to see, but it has a nice little texture. It almost looks like a material. It's just really, really pretty. Now, there is one more option, and let me show you, and you can decide what you want to do. And this is kind of down the road, but it's meant to let you know that you may want to keep that embossing folder handy. Let me hold up the two examples that I have, and you're going to see that the one card where I have the stamping, this is absolutely untouched in terms of, this is just cardstock, and I stamped on it, and I'll show you the coloring. The other one, after I colored it, I went ahead and I embossed it. And that's an option. So if you want to keep out your embossing folder, please do, because you may want to use that later. And what we're going to do for this, the first step in really putting the card together, is we're going to go ahead and we're going to adhere the two pieces that we just embossed. One is going to go on the front fold, and the other is going to go on the inside fold. And as usual, I am going to grab my liquid glue. I just prefer this. If you are not a liquid glue person, grab whatever glue makes you happy and go ahead and put these on. You should find that you will have a frame all the way around your designer series paper that's going to be about the same in terms of spacing on all four sides. And there we have our front piece, and I'm going to do the exact same on the other piece. And I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but just make sure that if you do have a piece that has a pattern on it, triple check before you commit yourself to putting that down with adhesive, and that you know which way your card is opening. I don't know how many times I have put things on a little bit upside down and had to either completely change the design or try to fix it. And it can be a little challenging at times. All right. And I can see I need to put just a little bit more adhesive on the corner here. So I'm just going to do a little dot and tap that down. And now I have both of my folds with the designer series paper. What I can also do at this point is I can go ahead and put that frame on the inside of my card. And this is going to be the frame that will eventually have the stamped piece on top. I'm going to go ahead and put that down. And you do have options here as well. You can, if you want, you can run that frame through your embossing folder. And that's what I did on these pieces. And it just gives, again, it just gives a little hint of texture. You can't see very much at all, but there's enough, I think, to capture somebody's eye. And I do think it's worth taking just a few seconds to run that through an embossing folder as well. And the tasteful texture one is, again, perfect because you don't have to line it up. You're not going to see a lot. And the design that is left is really a very small design. So you can see it without having to see the entire piece. So again, sorry that you're kind of listening and watching me put a piece of paper through an embossing folder and through a big kick, but I think it's worth taking 2 seconds to do this to get a little bit of texture on it. And think about it. You could also, if you wanted to add more color, you could take this piece of cardstock, you could put a little bit of ink with a blending brush or a sponge or anything that you want, even direct to paper, and have a little bit more color on the outside of your frame. And I've already said this, but a lot of this piece is going to be hidden by the focal point on the top, but you'll still see some of that pattern around the edge. So it's still pretty enough to do. So I'm going to go ahead and use some adhesive and stick that down. I am going to put a little bit in the middle just to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. And again, I should have a little bit of a border for the inside. And that border should be about the same size, at least if I've cut my paper okay, when I compare the border on all of the card. So you should see about the same amount of area around everything. All right, so we have our card base, and then each section of the card we have put on either designer series paper or color, and the texture is the same throughout. Now we're ready to focus on the focal point, the area that will first probably draw the person's eye to the card. And this is going to be the backdrop for the card when the person opens it, to see what is shown on the right-hand side. And then if you wanted to put any sentiment, or maybe you wanted to write your message here, that would be shown when the card is open. To me, this area that is seen just calls for a vertical stamp or stamps or something that can be designed that shows height. And what I found was perfect was the stamp in the Dragonfly Garden stamp set. It is gorgeous. There is a lot of detail. There are some really, really pretty flowers in this stamp, and it just begs for color. It is absolutely stunning. So what I did is while I was watching TV with Bruce one night, I went ahead and I stamped a couple of pieces of paper with that stamp. And what I wanted to do is start with an ink that is the color of my card base. And again, my card base was Mossy Meadow. And obviously a green is really a great color to start with if you're using foliage, because it's the starting point. And then you can add color and it will look very much like a garden. So this is done in Mossy Meadow, and it was simply stamping that particular image. But when I stamped it, and I did it in my Stamparatus, I made sure that I positioned that stamp so that it would show on the area that is in the background when the card is closed. I wanted to make sure that it was going to be in this frame and as centered or as center-ish as I could get it. So I purposely stamped on the right side, and that's why you see it stamped like that. Then I got out another of the stamps that is included in this particular set. I like the words. I really like the font. I think they are incredibly pretty. And I used the "You Are an Inspiration." And again, when I did this, I made sure that I stamped it so that that sentiment could not be seen when the card is closed, but it would be seen when the card is open. So I'm just mentioning that when you do that, what I did is I put my card, even at this level, I put this into my Stamparatus, and I made sure that when I put my words, that they were on this side. When I put the flower, they were on this side. And that way it's all nice and even and hidden until the card is open. So I then took my piece where I had put my flower stamp, and like I mentioned, I added the sentiment, and I made sure that when I added the sentiment, and forgive my really, really messy plate because it is a disaster, that when I added that sentiment, that it was going to go, like I've already said, on the left side. So there it is. And that it wouldn't be shown when the card is closed. I decided to use one of the blues that is in some of the designer series paper. And it's a Misty Moonlight that is in the designer series paper. because I knew that I was also going to include some blues in the coloring that I was going to do on the flower. So my sentiments for this card are in the Misty Moonlight color. Just a fun take, and greens and yellows and blues, in my opinion, go together really, really well. This sentiment, and especially this stamp, to me, call for coloring. And I am a watercolor pencil-aholic. I love watercolor pencils. This is a container that used to have lemonade mix in it, and it's perfect for pencils. And especially if you are making something, when I make something and I have specific colors that I use and I want to replicate, I just write down the color numbers that I'm using on a particular piece. I used a lot, as you can see. And then I just took these pencils, stuck them into this container. And the beauty of this is I can bring that little container and a couple of pieces of cardstock where I've already stamped. I'll bring those out to the living room and I can color while we're watching a show. I wanted to show you, and I'm not trying to tell you the best way to color. I want to show you some of the things that I like to do, which you may or may not like to do with watercolor pencils, but I love to layer the colors. So for example, I've kind of started in on this cone flower, and I really wanted to add a couple of colors. So to me, it's almost like alcohol marker coloring, where you put a base in and then you add more, and then you go back and you varnish and blend. And this kind of coloring is addicting because it is really fun to layer the colors. It is really fun to go back and just see how you can put shadows and depth. So I would start with a kind of a lighter shade, and then at the top, I'm going to pull in a darker shade, and then I'm going to go back one more time, and I'm going to pull in an even darker shade. And then when I'm done with all of that, I go back to the light shade and I just pull it all together, and it really will blend. And it's crazy, but it really will blend, and it's really, really fun. A couple of things that I highly, highly suggest if you like watercolor or any kind of pencil coloring. A couple of tools to have on hand. One is an eraser, and there are specific kinds of erasers for watercolor pencils. And you want to have one of these because it will save you. And the other thing is a really good pencil sharpener. And this is a Prismacolor one that I got. And I have watched a lot of videos. And the best tip that I can give you, or I bet most people will have when you watch a video, is the pointier you have your pencil, the better you're going to do. And you will find that you're going to use this sharpener on multiple occasions just to go back in and get a really fine point, and to have that fine point. It makes the coloring a lot easier. I'm not done coloring with this piece, but I'm going to go ahead and attach it to my card because I can go back later and I can add in some more depth and still play around with it even after I have it on the card. So I could put a blank one with a sentiment on my card and go back and color it in, and I would be all set. All right, at this point where you have your card focal point ready to go, this is where you need to make a decision if you're going to emboss that piece or if you are going to leave it just plain. I'm going to leave this one plain. And the reason is that if I choose to write a a message to the person here, I don't want to have to write over something that has embossing. I think it would be a little bit difficult. You can write here. You could also turn the card around and write on the back, but I'm going to leave this one alone. So I'm going to bring back in the card that I've been working on, and I am simply going to adhere this down over the plane. And then we're going to move on to making a belly band. When you do put something on top of a piece that has embossing on it, I do recommend you put a little bit more glue than you may normally, because that piece that is embossed is going to have some little crevices, and it's important to make sure that the glue is really getting down into the area underneath the embossing or where it's de-embossed. So I tend to put a little bit more adhesive if I am gluing onto something that has embossing. And I'm going to turn that upside down and really give it a nice burnish, which is going to help it stick a little bit more. Okay, so there we go. There I have the base of my card. I've got everything pretty much all done except for the belly band and then any final embellishments that I want. Let's talk about the belly band. I'm going to put this onto the card that I've been putting together here. The trick with a belly band is to make something that is tight enough that it is going to go around your card. And I know most of you, all of you have made these, but you don't want it so tight that you can't get it off easily. You don't want it so loose that it is going to fall off. So there's a little bit of a happy medium that you need to get to. Well, I'm not saying that I'm great at putting belly bands together, but here are some things that kind of work for me. We've got 2 pieces of cardstock that we're going to use to put this belly band together. I am not going to adhere the skinnier piece to the wider piece, because if I do, I'm going to have adhesive all the way underneath that yellow piece. And if I try to fold it, it's not going to work well. That yellow piece is going to start pulling back because it's stuck all the way to the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to glue it in the middle. I'm going to put a little bit of glue about in the middle. I'm not really getting crazy about where this is, but about in the middle horizontally of that piece. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adhere these 2 pieces together. And I'm not getting crazy about whether they're exactly end to end. I am going to try and get it as centered as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and move where I didn't have that centered really well. And all I'm doing here is I am getting the 2 pieces glued together so that now I can sort of use it as one piece. And it's only glued sort of in between my fingers here. The other thing when you make a belly band is you need to think about where you want the ends to come together. My ends come together on the front underneath where I've put my dragonfly, which means that I need to think about where I'm going to place these 2 now combined one piece and where I'm going to start folding. And the reason I wanted the fold to be here is I want this stamp to stand on its own, and I want this area that doesn't have a lot of design to be highlighted by this cute little dragonfly. So what I'm going to do is a couple of things. I am going to kind of gauge where I want my belly band to be. I'm going to position some Scotch tape. That's going to be my saving grace here. And I am going to just take this and I'm going to bring my belly band so that I've got, I don't know, that could be about 3 inches. We'll call it 3 inches. That's what I'm going to call it anyway. And I'm going to bring this piece around. I'm not holding it tight, I'm wrapping it. And I'm not going to squeeze the end. I'm going to let that just kind of fold over. And then I'm going to bring it to the back. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm not really making this flat. And I'm going to just kind of see how that works. And then I'm going to test this before I commit myself to anything. And the way that I'm going to test it is I'm just going to take a little bit of tape. I am actually, because this is long, I want my belly band to end about 1 inch or so from the edge. I'm going to cut this, and I'm not even worried about it. I am just going to cut it. I'm going to do the best that I can to cut it straight, but at the end of the day, it's not going to matter because I'm going to be putting some embellishments over the top of this, so nobody's going to see it anyway. So I'm just putting that to the side, and I'm going to take a little bit of tape. I'm not going to tack that down really hard because this is going to give me the opportunity to see if this is good or not. And then I'm going to test it. Can I move this up and down? And you're going to notice that I did this so that I'm looking at it from the back, because I'm actually going to flip this around in just a second. But you know what? That's okay. I can move it without a problem. It's not too tight. I also test it to see if it falls down. It doesn't. So, okay, I think I'm okay with that. I'm going to take it off. And another test that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it the way that it will be on my card. And remember, I want the area where those pieces are coming together to be underneath my focal point on the left, because that's going to give me some room to make a design on the top. And I'm going to test it. Is this working for me? Is it too tight, too loose? Let's see. And you may find that you've got to sort of squish the ends together a little bit to get it to go over. Okay, not bad. Not bad. All right. So if I know that's where I want it to go, this is where I can start putting some adhesive. And you are going to take that piece of tape off, but because you're going to be holding your piece down, it will be in the place that it needs to be for you to actually get it all together. So we'll let that come up. This yellow piece is not adhered to my green, so I need to do that. And that just means that I need to put a little bit of glue on the green, and I'm going to, again, I am not putting any kind of pressure on the end. I don't want it to get so tight that it's not going to work. Then I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the yellow, and my green is going to go on top of that. And this is where I'll start trying to get it straight. And I'm looking at the two greens and trying to get them to look like they belong together. And once that glue is sort of set, then the last place I need to put glue on is under the yellow. And I'll bring that together. I do not care that there's a gap right here. That's going to get covered up. I really, really, really don't care about that. And I'm just going to hold this for a second and let it dry. If I wanted to, because I am going to be covering up that little gap between the two pieces, what I might do just to give myself a little bit of grace while I'm finishing this up is put a piece of tape And I'm not even going to bother to take that piece of tape off because that is now going to be underneath where I put my design. And then I'm just double, triple, quadruple checking. Yep, it's still moving. It's going to be fine. And it's not falling off. So that will work. All right. So this is where there is a tremendous amount of leeway in the way you finish your card and the way you finish the belly band. A couple of things that I did, and I'm going to repeat them just because I thought they worked well the first time. One is I'm going to put a sentiment and I'm going to stamp it over here on the right. Then I'm going to add a couple of little fun embellishments over on the left. In order for me to do that stamping, I'm going to take the belly band off. I just find it is much, much easier to take it off. I've already got my Stamparatus set up. You can do this in Stamparatus. You can do it freehand. You can do it however you are comfortable. And again, forgive me for this being completely messy. But I have this set up where I know where I need to put this band on in order to get those words as straight as I can. I'm not going to kind of flip out if it's not completely straight. And the magnets are not going to go all the way down on the right because I've got so much thickness and I'm really not trying to push that all the way in. And I am just going to double check and make sure that those words are about where I want them. Yeah, looks pretty okay. I may straighten that up just a tad based on the grid that I've got going on here. And then I am using the Misty Moonlight, which is the color that I chose for my sentiment since I'm using some blue. And I'll just ink that up and come in on the top of my belly band. I don't think I even need to stamp that twice. So I am fine with how that came out. So I've got my For a True Friend. And now I can do some of my final embellishing. To do the final embellishing, I do recommend that you put the belly band back on because that way you're going to have a little bit of a piece to push down on when you put your different pieces on. And you'll be able to see how it all works on your card. So I am going to go ahead and put this back on. And like I said, and you've used belly bands before, it just takes sometimes a little bit of convincing to get it to start working. But once it does, then you're good to go. You may also find that whatever design you used, the belly band might look better in the middle, at the top. I wanted this more toward the bottom, at least to start, so that more of the flowers were seen. And what I decided to do on this was I used a couple of things. I've got a punch. This is an old one, and it's just got a nice little design. And when I was cutting paper, you remember that on the examples that I had, I used this design on the center fold. Well, because I cut my paper the way I did, I had an extra piece that I can use if I want to decorate part of my belly band. So I'm just using that designer series paper. I'm going to punch that little piece out. I thought it was kind of fun because it's a nice, cute little design, plus it matches the colors that I have on my card. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to adhere that down so that I've got a starting point on this particular part of the design. And again, I can push down a little bit harder than I could if the belly band was not attached. I'm just going to try and get that as straight as I can. I'm using the lines on the yellow And just trying to get it sort of straight. It doesn't matter if it's in the middle or not. That's close enough. So that's sort of the start. I did put some other little punched pieces. I'm not really sure that they're needed, so I decided not to do it on this one, but I used a scallop, and I've got a couple little scallops on either side, same color that I used as the middle ability on the bumblebee. Just didn't think that I really needed that this time. And then, obviously, the biggest piece on this is a large dragonfly. This comes from one of the pieces of the designer series paper that is part of the suite. There's also a punch that is part of the suite. And not coincidentally, the large butterfly on the punch is the same size as these large butterflies. And then the little butterfly is the same size as some of the butterflies. So if you look at the large butterfly on the designer series paper, and then you go above each of those, there is a kind of a medium size, and then they're small. The small ones do not work with the punch, but the medium size do. But please notice this. If you look at the punch, and you look at the way the dragonflies are oriented on the punch, they are in a line. They are directly one above the other. That's not the case on the paper. So you have to be a little careful and a little creative when you are cutting these out so you don't waste your paper. And I'm going to show you how to do that. I want to cut, or I want to punch out this blue one, and I want to punch out this yellow one. I can't do that by simply putting a punch in there because I won't get them. So what I'm going to do, since I am a person who doesn't like to waste paper, and don't cringe, this is a way to do it, is I am cutting out around that blue. Now you're probably saying, why don't you just fussy cut it? Well, I could. I definitely could. But that's not as much fun. So I want to cut that blue out, but there's no way that I'm going to get this piece of paper in here to hold it to be able to see what I'm punching. That's why God invented Post-it notes. Because if you take a Post-it note and you put it, like this is a big piece of Post-it note. This is now an extension of my hand. And I can use that, and I can pull that butterfly in, and I can get it centered like that. And I can punch it out, and there I have my, not butterfly, sorry, my dragonfly. So there I've got my big dragonfly that I just punched out with my punch. And I'm going to also get a small dragonfly. And I'm going to punch it out with that. I'm doing the exact same thing. And again, you may think this is completely crazy because you could just fussy cut it. Yes, you could. You absolutely could. But you can also use this little technique to go in and punch it out. And I will show you in a second that there are stamps that are also in the stamp set that correspond with these. So I'm using my piece of Post-it note. I am going to bring that little piece in, and I'm going to line this up. I am right-handed, so holding the stamp with my left hand is a little challenging. Let's see, I'm almost there. And we all know that when you punch things out, you want to look at where you are punching. So you hold the punch upside down. I'm going to go ahead and punch that little guy out. And if you did not notice where that little dragonfly goes, this is one of the example cards. The little dragonfly is, I put him or her up near one of the flowers and gave a little bit of 3 dimensions. Now, I want to give you one more tip, and that is that you can line these dragonflies up when you are getting them ready to stamp. so that they're on the edge of a piece of paper. And that way, when you stick the paper into the punch, you're only cutting the paper around the dragonfly. You're not going to be wasting paper above. So you can get the paper aligned so that it's at the edge, and then you would stick the paper into the punch and cut these out. And there's some really cool dragonfly punches in this. I love the wings, and I think there would be a lot that you could do with those wings. All right. Well, we are about at the point where we can start finalizing our card. And just a couple more things to do. One is to put your dragonfly piece on the top here. And the other is to put your dragonfly over on the right. And then we're also going to add a fun little ladybug. And let me show you what I did for each of those. There are a couple of little tricks and tips for those. And you may or may not notice on the example card, I actually used some dimensionals on the dragonfly just to pop that up. And I gave it a little bit of a curl on the wings. So I'm using my bone folder. I'm just going to curl the wings up a little bit. And then I like to make sure that when I put the dimensionals on and I put my piece onto the card, that I have some dimensionals in places where they're really going to help. And what I mean by that is when you think about how this dragonfly is sort of sitting on this belly band, I'm putting dimensionals behind the body, including the upper part of the body and also this little tail, just so it will stick up where I want it to, and it will not droop in the back. So I have some dimensionals that I am purposely cutting. And we all do this. We all do this, where we take a dimensional, we cut it into the shape that we want. And I'm just making sure that I've got these skinny little pieces that I can stick onto my dragonfly. And that way, the body and that little part of the tail is going to be at the same height when I get this all done. And then you can align him or her however you want. And just stick them on. I'm purposely trying not to get it exactly diagonal. There we go. So there's that little dragonfly. And then for the small one, I sort of did the same thing, but I didn't use dimensionals. And the reason for that is this little guy is going to be sitting on the card that is going to have this belly band going up and down. And if it were higher, there's a good chance that the belly band is not going to be wide enough that they're going to bump into each other. So I didn't want to do that, which meant that I'm going to take a little bit of glue, and I'm going to be very intentional of where I put the glue. And I'm mimicking where I put the glue on, where I put the dimensionals on the other guy. So I'm putting it on the body and on the tail. And I am just going to put this little guy down. And it's kind of fun to bring him over to the side. He could even have his tail hanging off the side a little bit. And when he dries, I can make those wings, make sure that they're nice and three-dimensional. So the last thing that we need to do on this card is to attach the little ladybug. And these ladybugs, I've already mentioned this, but they are stinking cute. They are really substantial and they have a lot of detail. They're also a very nice bronze color. And one thing that I found a little challenging is they have a hollowed area under their body. So I thought, okay, could I put a mini dimensional behind there? It didn't work really well. Could I put a Could I put glue around it and stick it down? That didn't work really well. What ended up working for these, at least for me, was to take a couple of glue dots, and I'm actually putting these on my fingers, and I am going to roll them into a bigger glue dot, or you can take a bigger glue dot, and I'm going to stick that glue dot into the crevice so that it goes into the crevice, but it's also popping out of the crevice. And that gives me enough glue to figure out where I want that little guy to go. And then I can push him down, and it's not going anywhere. It is staying. Even if I pop it up, it's going to stay. So there's our card. And the only thing that I wanted to mention, well, actually two things. When you mail this, I strongly recommend that you get another quarter sheet or so of white cardstock. This happens to be the one that I've stamped the image on, so I wouldn't use this, but I'm really referencing the size. And you put that on top of this card because there are going to be some fragile pieces that you do not want to get messed up in the mail. So you would actually stick that on the top and put it into an envelope. It may not fit snugly into a traditional A2 size because of this belly band and because of the height and thickness. So you may have to make a little bit of an accommodation, even a 5x7, or you can make your own envelope and put it in. That's one thing. The other thing is when you're using the belly band on this, you just need to pay attention if you have something over here on the right that has a little height, that you can still clear that. And more importantly, when you put the belly band back on, that you just kind of hold down, in my case, hold down the wings before you slide it back. But it works without a problem. So that is the card. I think that your brains are probably reeling, hopefully, with some different ideas of different occasions, designs, different ways that you can use this particular type of card, and also just different ways that you might use even this design to come up with cards that look like these for your garden. I think this would be a beautiful Mother's Day card rather than True Friend. Mother's Day would be really nice. Birthday cards would be perfect. Get well, obviously, many, many, many others. So that is the card for today. And I hope you've enjoyed it.